Okay, in this portion, we're going to be looking at just a few of the facial muscles, and then we'll talk about some of the neck muscles. There are a lot of muscles here, but I just want to cover some of the main ones that I've seen pop up over the last few terms. So the one going around the eyes is called the Orbicularis Oculi, not to be confused with the one going around the lips, which would be Orbicularis oris. Orbicularis oris goes around the mouth. Orbicularis oculi goes around the eyes. Here is the nasalis. We could see these two coming off of the zygomatic bone, where we have a zygomaticus minor and a zygomaticus major coming off of the zygomatic bone. Here's the platysma muscle. Here is the depressor anguli oris. Depressor anguli oris, like to frown or to pull the lips downward. So here's the depressor anguli oris. Once again, that's, to grimace. And then the opposite of that would be the levator anguli oris, which is up here. That would be smiling. So these two would be antagonistic to one another. And then you have these two that are antagonistic to one another, right? You have the levator labii superioris. What's the opposite of levator, or to elevate? That would be depress, so that's the depressor. Labii just means lips. And then superioris, the opposite of that is inferioris. So levator labii superioris would be giving like a sneering type of look. And then depressor labii inferioris would give you this pouting type of look. What is the origin of the highlighted muscle? So this is why osteology is so important. So what bone do we have here? That's the zygomatic bone, right? It can't be temporal bone, that's up here. Can't be mandible, that's down here. Maxilla, upper jaw. Parietal, up here. So zygomatic bone, the zygomatic arch is the best answer. What is this muscle here? It's the platysma, right? If you were to do this, that's what the platysma does. Can't be these other muscles, right? Masseter, we know where that is. The jaw, the mentalis is over here on the chin. Orbicularis oris is the circular muscles going around the lips, and zygomaticus major is here. Just remember, minors are always over majors, or superior to majors. Okay, we're going to go to neck muscles. Usually I give a pause, but let's go on to some of the neck muscles because that was a pretty short section. When we look at the neck, here on the lateral view, we can see the sternocleidomastoid. The SCM is named after its origin and insertion, so sternocleidomastoid. Sternum, clavicle, inserts to the mastoid process. On the back side, we have the trapezius. And what's interesting is that embryologically, the trapezius and the SCM muscle are fused. And then as the embryo and as the baby grows, and the scapula starts to grow and elongate, as that strut bone elongates, these muscle fibers here start to separate. And then you get two separate muscles, SCM and the trapezius. Here's the upper trapezius. The middle fibers and lower fibers of the traps we can't quite see. Deep to the trapezius is a muscle that we can see here called Splenius Capitus. Capitus means like the occiput. So if we look at it on this view here from the posterior view, here's the trapezius. We can see we have upper fibers of the traps which elevate the scapula. We have middle fibers of the traps which retract or adduct the scapula. And then we have these lower fibers down here. These are the lower fibers of the traps. If we were to dissect and remove and deflect or reflect the upper trapezius away, if we were to dissect it and move this away, what's deep to it is the Splenius Capitus moving in this direction. So you could see it here from the side view. It is deep to the traps. And here the trapezius on the person's right-hand side was dissected away. So we can see that here. With the trapezius dissected away, it allows us to see this muscle called the levator scapula. It is named by its action that it elevates the scapula. It originates on the transverse processes of C1, 2, 3, and 4, and inserts here on the superior angle of the scapula. Here is the spine of the scapula. Here is the vertebral border of the scapula. We can see again with the trapezius dissected, we can see these two rhomboid muscles, rhomboid minor, rhomboid major. You heard me say with the zygomaticus minor and major that minor was above major, meaning superior to it. And here with the rhomboids, once again, the same rules apply. Minors are above majors. Here's rhomboid minor going from C7, T1, spinous process, to the vertebral border or medial border of the scapula. And here's the rhomboid major going from T2, T3, T4, T5 spinous processes to the medial border of the scapula, once again. Okay, so let's stick with the neck here. Let's go and take a look here. So what is this muscle? Sternocleidomastoid. This is the left SCM. This is the right SCM. Again, sternocleidomastoid. When the right SCM contracts, it rotates the head to the left. When the left SCM contracts, it rotates the head to the right. This is a close-up view. Here's the clavicle, and here's the clavicle. Here is the sternal fibers and the clavicular fibers. So this is the sternoclavicular portion. We don't see the mastoid portion because they're not even showing the rest of the neck. What is the origin of the highlighted muscle? So the origin will be the medial aspect of the clavicle, the manubrium, and the sternum. Okay, the rest of them just don't make sense when we talk about origins because the origin is here, the insertion is here. Remember, origins typically stay stationary and insertions are the part that move. So if the origin is here and the insertion is here, when the origin stays still and the insertion moves, it rotates the head. Now, these muscles are deep. You could see the SCM is removed. These are the scalene muscles. The scalenes, there are three of them. There's scalenus anticus, scalenus anterior, scalenus posterior, and scalenus medius. So there's scalenus anticus, medius, and posticus, or scalenus anterior, middle, and posterior. And what they're showing piercing between the scalenus anticus or anterior and the scalenus medius and posterior, which is behind, is this group of nerves called the brachial plexus. These nerves come out of the neck but pierce between the scalenes as they go under the clavicle and down the entire upper extremity. It is the brachial plexus of the neck that starts at C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1 nerve root that goes all the way down the arm and controls every muscle from the shoulder down to the fingers. Those nerves are called the median nerve, the ulnar nerve, the radial nerve, the musculocutaneous nerve, and the axillary nerve. Those are the 5 terminal branches of the brachial plexus that come off the neck. That's why when people have subluxation of the neck or nerve interference or nerve pinching of the neck by either a misaligned vertebra or arthritis in the neck or a bone spur or disc bulge and herniation, they can often get muscle weakness, okay, because the neck controls everything from the shoulder down to the fingers. Okay, going over some other intrinsic neck muscles, it's important to understand some of the anatomy here. Let's remember there's the hyoid bone, then we have the thyroid cartilage, then there's the cricoid cartilage, and then there's the thyroid gland. So we shouldn't confuse the Adam's apple, right, or this, the thyroid cartilage, which is the sometimes known as the laryngeal prominence, that part that sticks out that people call the Adam's apple. Typically, if you extend the head back as a result of the hormone testosterone, testosterone thickens cartilage. So when we have an individual with higher amounts of testosterone, that cartilage or Adam's apple will be thicker, which is why we tend to see that more prominent in males than biological females. So the hyoid bone, the only bone in the body that doesn't articulate with any other bone. Then you have your thyroid cartilage, cricoid cartilage, and then the thyroid gland. It's this H-shaped gland. We have an isthmus between. This is the left lobe and right lobe. On the posterior side of the thyroid gland would be the parathyroid gland, but we really don't see that from this view. You have to see it from the posterior. Now, the reason why I point this out is you're going to see a group of muscles that have the word hyoid in it, or thyrohyoid, or cricohyoid, or cricothyroid. You're going to hear these names that are a little bit tricky, so it's important to know where these parts are in relationship to each other. So again, hyoid, thyroid, cricoid. So again, from here, we can see this bone, right? Here's the hyoid bone. Here's the thyroid cartilage. And here's the cricoid cartilage, which is here. Here's the thyroid gland. Here's the manubrium of the sternum. And here's the clavicle. So some of the muscles that we can see, we have one called the Omohyoid, which we see here. There is a superior belly, and then there is an inferior belly. That's called the Omohyoid. Then we have a sternothyroid, going from the sternum to the thyroid cartilage here. So that's the sternothyroid. Then we have a cricothyroid, going from the cricoid cartilage to the thyroid cartilage. There's the cricothyroid. Now going from the thyroid to the hyoid is the thyrohyoid muscle. Thyrohyoid muscle. Then we have muscles that go from the tongue, or the base of the tongue, to the hyoid bone. So then we have the geniohyoid. Then we have a muscle that goes from the styloid process to the hyoid bone, and that's called the stylohyoid. Then we have the digastrix. We see here di because it's two heads to it. There's an anterior belly and a posterior belly, so we could see it here. And then underneath, deep, this large one is called the Milo Hyoid. The Milo Hyoid. Here, it's cut so and reflected back so we could see a little bit more of the geniohyoid. Okay, and then here's your mandible. That's your coronoid process, and that is the condylar process of the mandible. Okay, so here is the thyrohyoid. Thyrohyoid. It's not the sternothyroid. We don't see anything attaching to the sternum. We don't see the scalenes. That would be over here. We don't see the digastric. That's the loop. We don't see the loop. And hypoglossus we didn't even mention before. Okay, now here is the sternocleidomastoid. This is the sterno going up higher to the hyoid. Remember, this is the thyroid cartilage, Sternohyoid. Here's your stylohyoid, the styloid process. Remember, the mastoid is here, styloid is here. So going from the styloid to the hyoid bone is the stylohyoid muscle. Here is the geniohyoid, geniohyoid. Here is the Milo Hyoid, Milo Hyoid. Most of these are pure identification. They don't ask much on origins and insertions here. And then here is the two bellies of the digastric. Here is the hard palate. Here's the tongue. Here's the soft palate. And right down there, that would be the uvula. And here is the C1 vertebrae. Here is the C2 body. That's the dens or the odontoid of C2. Here's C3, C4, C5, C6, C7. Here's the spinal cord. And you have some bone spurs here. That's kind of interesting. You could see some osteophytes or bone spurs that are putting a little bit of pressure on the spinal cord right there. Okay, here's the levator scapula going from C1, C2, C3, C4 to the superior angle of the scapula. It's not showing it too well. This is your Splenius Capitus, right? That is the muscle that's deep to the trapezius. What is the insertion? So the origin is at C1, C2, C3, C4 transverse processes. And the insertion is going to be on the superior angle and the medial border of the scapula, and it elevates the scapula based on its name. What is the action of levator scapula? Elevation of the scapula by its name. Pretty straightforward. Here is the semi-spinalis capitis, right? It's not rhomboid major. Rhomboids go to the scapula. It's not the erector spinae, that's down lower. Not rhomboid major, it's not Splenius Capitus. Splenius Capitus runs obliquely. The semi-spinalis is more vertical.